So we've been hard at work on Avatar Frontiers of Pandora for multiple years, really honing in on the quality and really making sure that our brand new slice of Pandora, the Western Frontier, really fits in to the Avatar universe.
The game is canon in terms of the IP and the storyline and the world of Pandora.
One of the things we wanted to retain was that sense of awe and wonder when you first step into Pandora, because that is just like central to the Avatar experience, is just going, wow.
Pandora gives all of these opportunities. You have a world and an environment that in and of themselves can just do more things than what we can do if you're on planet Earth. It's not been a challenge of finding, something that was cool, but like editing so that we only have the coolest things.
So the inspiration came from really all over the place my whole life. It also came from my sense of a strong sense of outrage and injustice about what was happening to the natural world, what was happening to indigenous cultures around the world.
I haven't had a direct line of feedback to James Cameron himself, but we do work directly with other people who work directly on the movies.
It was incredibly exciting to work directly with Lightstorm, to say, okay, let's take the super rich world you already have, but then creating new things and expanding on it with them was a super fun opportunity.
Well, we developed the story on our side and pitched it to them at various levels of fidelity. There's a lot of world logic and cultural logic and character logic that we have to follow.
It's been a collaboration, but a lot of the things have come from us. We think of the things, we think of the gameplay challenges that we want the players to have, we create the regions, and then we talk to Lightstorm and they help guide us so that we make sure that we're securely anchored in the lore and that we present something that's a canon for the universe.
There were a lot of times where, we would come with gameplay ideas and we would have ideas on exactly how we could make it fit into the lore, but other times we would say, hey, we need your help. We really want to do this gameplay mechanic, but we're not entirely sure the best way to make it fit. And so a great example of that was actually your SID, which is this resistance device. And so you can actually temporarily hack and take over an amp suit, for example, or a turret. And so we actually worked directly with Ben Proctor, who has worked on the films. He does all of the RDA art and production design stuff. And he had, of course, extensive knowledge of all the workings of the amp suits and how we could integrate that into gameplay.
Everything that you see that you don't recognize, basically. Everything that you see in the upper planes, in the clouded forest, all of that is brand new and is something that we made for this game.
And we have a lore person who works extremely closely with Lightstorm and Disney to ensure that everything we do fits with everything they're doing on the movie side and transmedia parts of Avatar that are happening.
You have a lot of room to be creative within certain parameters, and that actually is extremely good for trying to find imaginative possibilities within the parameters of the IP. So it's actually been a lot of fun.
We could never stop at the first idea because there are very clear rules. You'd come to the first idea and then you'd be like, oh, actually that won't work because there are these things that we rely on that we take for granted, like buildings, writing, things that we don't have in Na'vi culture. So we have to think of a new way to do it, and that can be really sort of engaging and inspiring because, you just have to be more creative.
I mean, I don't know exactly what they're going to use for future movies, but there are for sure things that we have developed that they are using in some other IP. It's very fun and exciting to be part of an IP where you can create new things and the IP creators are enthused and excited about those things.
Our world design is securely anchored in Pandora, and so that means that there is rules of the moon that we have to rely on and let us guide us. But more than anything, nature and the nature of Pandora and the nature of the Western Frontiers is like the foundation where we start. So when you don't have roads or railroads or cities or Earth-like hubs, you do need to think completely differently about how you create a world that's readable for the player. Where do we place things in this pure natural space so that you can still look at a space and feel like, it looks like maybe I should go to there.
It's incredibly clear, I think, when you play Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, just the amount of effort and love and detail that's put into every little element.
There's actually a lot of craftsmanship that goes into shaping a world so that you can feel anchored and know how to find your way. In a game like ours, we'll end up using rivers and lakes. We use clearings to get you out where you can see.
We do have a pretty in-depth wildlife ecosystem, and of course there are predators, there are prey, and you can watch them interact. And they have senses. They have a sense of smell, hearing, sight, and it kind of depends on the species and the environment as well. But then there's also, the plant life. There's different foods that some wildlife will be attracted to, and you'll see them eating or sometimes rolling around in it because they like to be there. Of course, they'll drink water, they'll sleep at certain times of day. So you can really kind of see how this ecosystem all interacts.
We always start with something that is real, something that's anchored in our own world. We learn and deep dive into, biology, basically. And suddenly you know a bunch of stuff about corals or, and then we look at what type of aspects of this may be interesting for the gameplay experience.
There are these little things that kind of pop up when there's sound. And it's really interesting because when you're hunting, you can't always necessarily notice when things are around, but you can see these things kind of pop up and look at things, and you're like, oh, I wonder what it's looking at. And then typically it draws your attention to something that you can hunt.
So we have a bunch of plants that can help you in various ways, help you gain verticality, or just be fun to play around with. But then we also look at the environments themselves. Everything is a package, right? The upper plains has wide open grasslands, obviously a lot of wind. So then you have to have creatures that are well adapted to wind. And then you start looking into what types of gameplay features can we do with wind, and what type of plants or creatures on Earth do things that we could remap. And then you start mixing and matching different things. And in the end, you come up with some quite spectacular alien animals. Yeah.
And this is everything in the Avatar universe. It needs to make sense biologically or scientifically. So to just say, oh, this thing catches fire when you touch it, it's well, how would that work? And those are the questions, right, that Lightstorm is really interested in. And I think that's also what makes the Avatar IP kind of special. That attention to detail and that thought that goes into every aspect.
There is some obvious things, right, about the number of legs and how they breathe and eye sets and stuff, things that you can see if you see the movie. So there's some baselines, and they're almost ingrained in us by now, so we don't really consider it weird that a creature has 6 legs, but the rest is partially making sure that things fit really well into their environments, and then through a really cool collaboration with Lightstorm where they help us and guide us at all points through the process to make sure that we actually get that good fit where we both have the gameplay things that we need, perfect fit for the environment, perfect fit for the lore of the world.
So each region has different gameplay opportunities. They're obviously visually very different, but yeah, they do have different gameplay opportunities. And so starting with the Kinglor Forest, you're going to see the big canopy, and you're going to see some wildlife and some plant life that you've seen. And of course, there are some new ones that we have invented in collaboration with Lightstorm.
Then once you have that forest, which is really chaotic and dense and filled with life and super colorful, then it comes pretty natural to start thinking about what's a good contrast to that. What is something that we're absolutely not showing when we're in that type of environment? And so the upper plains, which are these vast open grasslands, is just a very nice experience that showcases even more of what the Western frontiers are. That's not at all what you've experienced in the Kinglor Forest.
And when you get to the upper plains, the first thing you notice is the wind and kind of all the effects that has. Because yes, that will affect your Banshee, obviously, because wind can throw your Banshee, there's wind tunnels and things like that will kind of force you at super speed and temporarily carry you places, or vice versa. It will kind of prevent you from getting to some places. But it also plays an effect in how the wildlife move, where they go, where they feed. It has an effect on the entire ecosystem. And as a result, your harvesting journeys actually are different. And we build that into a lot of the puzzles. So there are trees that have pollen, and that pollen goes with the wind And that pollen actually helps improve the quality of materials that you have to harvest. It's a completely different kind of mechanic than where you were in the Kinglor forest.
And then moving on from that, we work a lot with what are the mood and the atmosphere that we want to present, what fits our main story, and what are some of the gameplay opportunities that we still want to work with that fits really well into the main campaign. And so that's where Clouded Forest comes in, which is a darker, more muted, more quiet place, at least on the surface.
It's mossy, so your footsteps are actually dampened a little bit. It leans a little bit more into stealth, whereas like, the upper plains, long sight lines, sniping, right, comes to mind. But here everything is short range, and we also kind of push that a little bit because there's this shroud that encapsulates the wildlife and it prevents you from harvesting. So you have to rethink the way that you hunt, for example, when you hit that region. So there are a lot of callbacks to that first film to make it feel familiar. And we did add new elements there, of course, but really the upper plains and the Clouded Forest are like the two regions where we, everything is brand new.
Such intricate embroidery.
Ah, the Sarentu. Perfect. Now, I am no coward, but there is a strange sound that wafts from the hills at night. Small concern given everything we are facing, right? Oh, the children disagree, though.
We looked at the world in terms of like, what are the geographical constraints of the 3 new regions and what kind of culture would emerge from that, because we know from our research that cultures emerge from like what is available, what kind of resources do we have, what kind of environments do we live in. So we used those historical principles of how cultures develop to figure out what the cultures might be. What kind of different personalities could this clan have? What kind of rules could they have? How could their attire be different? How could their response to the environment be different? Because you don't want them all to be variations of one thing. You want them to all be like completely different and in a really interesting way that corresponds with each other and also provides the player an opportunity to learn new things and to learn new skills and to craft new weapons and to just have a whole different experience with each region.
Yeah, we have 3 clans. We have the Ramanan, and they live in the Kinglor forest, and they are refined artists and musicians, and they are also caretakers of these creatures called Kinglor, huge moth-like creatures.
So it's not a moth, but it's kind of moth-like, and it lives in the tree and in the rainforest, and they use that to create silk, which they cultivate into beautiful weavings.
And they're also expert dyers, so their clothes are really beautifully coloured in blues and pinks and like intricately woven, and they also use it for the strings on their bows, and so that's a really key part of their culture. And they will sort of look down a little bit on the other clans because they're not quite as refined as the Ramanan.
And that's really what this is about as well. Those environments and those creatures, they start forming the foundation of what this clan could potentially be like. So the Seswa, they're a nomadic clan. They have a symbiotic relationship with these huge creatures that walk around the plains, and they use them to shield against the wind.
They don't move very much because they're enormous, but when the herd moves, that's when the clan moves. It's like a sort of once in a generation thing. So they actually build their tents and their structures up against the side of the Zakru. The Zeswa, they are warriors and they will assess you, but once they've assessed you, then they will throw a huge party to welcome their new friend.
And their whole temperament is also based on the environment they're in. So they're quite boisterous and competitive and like kind of loud and happy in a way. That matches that whole kind of openness and like the forceful winds of the plains.
And then the 3rd clan are the Kamatire. They live in the Clouded Forest and they are more reclusive, mysterious clan. They're a little wary of outsiders. Nobody has really seen them for a while, so they're very mysterious and they live in this land of mist and fog, and it's more sort of pine trees and mushrooms and ferns and things like that. And they are experts in herbalism. So they're expert healers and are expert foragers and gatherers and have an intricate knowledge of the plants around them and how to use them. And so they're much more organic kind of looking. And they're also experts in wood shaping. So they have a way of softening and manipulating wood into these beautiful organic shapes. So a lot of their clothes are quite structured with like sort of big shoulders and big collar pieces and things like that. So they're quite dramatic.
They took everything from us. From me. I was trained in their ways, their technology, their weapons. Things that a Navi should not know. And then one day, they left.
You are a Navi who has been raised in captivity by human beings, and then you break out and you re-enter Pandora, which is the world that you belong to. The story is you journeying through the region of Pandora in which the game takes place and discovering more about your past and more about your identity and becoming a Navi, essentially.
It's about belonging, really. Our main character is learning how to be a Navi in the world they're supposed to belong in when they don't know how to do that.
We wanted to create an opportunity, and I think we've done this really well, where you can be a Navi, but learn how to be a Navi over the course of the game, so that the player character and the player are having kind of parallel experiences in this world, like of discovery and of exploration and of curiosity and of surprise and of wonder.
And if you have a protagonist who's grown up there and is really familiar with it, they're not going to have those feelings. So, you know, we managed to have a character who is Navi as opposed to an avatar, but still has that sense of wanting to explore and, you know, find your way in this beautiful yet dangerous world.
We did want to create a character that players could use as an avatar and kind of project their own personality and preferences for the character onto it. There's an element of a coming-of-age story, so it's not like a action hero, smart-ass personality, but more like a inquiring, curious, wondering kind of personality.
Your father thinks the price of fighting them has been too great. Will be too great.
If we do not fight, we will lose everything.
We wanted the RDA to return, as they do in Avatar: Way of Water, and to be an antagonist. We wanted it to be before Way of Water and before the upcoming sequels, because we don't want to like interfere too much with the storylines. So it seemed like a really good right potential, because during our story, we know that Jake is over on the other side of the world fighting against the RDA too, and we are fighting as well, but in a different geographical region.
So yeah, there's new things. A lot of it's to do with Mercer, our main villain, and the people right around him.
Mercer is this ruthlessly ambitious man. He's also meticulous and cruel.
Mercer is a kind of villain who has convinced himself that he's doing good.
Mercer is one of those guys who has an opportunity to get ahead in his field and impress his peers. So I think he's kind of a blustery man who comes from a place of like deep insecurity and like wanting power and wanting control, who is frustrated by not being able to have that in the way that he wants to over the Navi. And that plays out in the game.
If anything gets in his way, you will rue the day, basically. And so that's a problem for the player character, because they're continually getting in his way. And so, yeah, he has to destroy them.
One of the big foundational pieces of the entire IP is that it's about colonization and pollution and exploitation of the Earth. So if you look at it from that framework, the people who are exploiting the resources of this beautiful world for profit, you can imagine the characters that come out of a scenario like that.
There's this kind of fun contrast we have with the tiny human soldiers, you know, who are normal-sized humans, but to you they look tiny. And of course, they're like paper tigers, right? Like you can tear through them super easily. You can melee them and send them flying just like in the films. And so that was actually, I think, one of the interesting challenges is like, well, how do you challenge this being with superhuman strength and size and speed and agility and all of those things. So we actually collaborated with Lightstorm to create new amp suits and aero units as well. Amp suits that are really built for ranged combat with grenades. So they'll kind of like hunker down and shoot grenades. And then we also have kind of a close quarters flamethrower wielding. We have another amp that they're kind of like the grizzled veterans. They're a little bit more tactical, a little bit more intelligent, but they also have bad tempers. They sometimes get really angry if you start damaging them too much. They haven't hit you in a while, and so they'll charge you, you know, and get really aggressive. So there's a lot of, I think, new mechanics and things that players will have not seen in the films that only exist in the game.
We have new RDA characters and some new aspects of the RDA organization. And those we have fleshed out, and it's been really fun to experiment with that.
Combat with the RDA, it's really more about the Na'vi weaponry being about precision and silence too. So like all the Na'vi weapons are quiet, so they preserve stealth, so it fits that style of gameplay great. And then all of the human weapons are really loud, destructive, imprecise. Personally, what I like to do is always start off with the Na'vi weapons, because I always try to start off stealth, and then inevitably I mess it up, and then it's guns blazing, shooting while everyone is alerted. One of the really interesting aspects, there's a different ecosystem in how the ammo works. So everything that's Na'vi, it comes from nature. So you're actually like getting the sticks and you're creating the arrows yourself. And that includes the special ammo. So you can create all manner of different arrows, like fire arrows, poison arrows. So you have a lot of control over those Na'vi weaponry, whereas the human weapons, that ammo ecosystem is, you have to loot it. Right? You can't make bullets from Pandora, so you have to take it from the RDA. So it's a very different ecosystem as well, which I think is interesting.
What took you so long? I slowed down for you.
How did you get up here so fast?
Ha!
Really, from the beginning, this was always envisioned as a first-person game, because we want to take you, the player, to Pandora, to really feel like you're there, right? All the little details, all the little, you know, the insects and the animals and the flora, the fauna, all of those things really come to life, and you can appreciate them in that first-person view.
Working with a Na'vi as the main character was not so much challenging as it just had all these opportunities.
One of the core fantasies, I think, of playing Na'vi is having that superhuman speed and agility, but also, I mean, you have carbon fiber bones essentially as a Na'vi, so you can withstand falls better, you can jump higher. There's all sorts of other benefits too that we really wanted to lean into. And so it was an interesting challenge because yes, you are really fast and you are very agile, but you're also very big.
All sorts of different things goes into that package of making the true Na'vi come to life. Controls is a big part, camera is a big part, the environments themselves and how we juxtapose Na'vi things with human things and like put you in positions where you get to actually see your size and compare it to make it feel that you're actually a Na'vi, that you're actually like 10 feet tall and not just a human.
One of the kind of challenges that we faced was you're 10 feet tall, you're in a space built for humans. How does that work for things like breaking line of sight and stealth? There's a lot of like creative solutions there. But the other thing though to remember are the amps, the big suits. They're on par with the size of Na'vi. So there's all sorts of items in the environment that are set up for them, which is really convenient for us because if it's set up for their size, it's set up for you.
We've focused a lot on making sure that you really can feel really agile and really powerful. There are things that you need to have more skill to learn, but the base feeling of being a fast, strong, agile Na'vi, that's something you pick up the controller and you have it.
I think there's a lot of choices in terms of like how you customize your character, the kind of skills that you decide to get, the kind of weapons that you decide to use, how you want to explore the open world, because it's a big open world and there's a lot of things to do. So I think you as a player have a lot of choices in terms of like how you interact with that world.
For sure, the Banshee in particular, I think is one of those elements where we saw a lot of potential with just kind of some of the core mechanics and how you could utilize them as a player. I've seen people do all sorts of fun things around like hunting with their Banshee, which is not probably recommended because you're not very accurate when you do that. But you know, like dive bombing and things like that while shooting arrows is really, it's a fun experience. So what we decided was to really lean into, you know, kind of the speed and movement. And then when you aim, that's like when we really slow you down. But that meant some really interesting challenges around, well, we really want you to have like explosive acceleration and be able to control that really tightly. And also, building in evasive maneuvers became really important for us as well. So that's why one of the first skills that you can unlock is a barrel roll. And so your Banshee can actually evade things like missiles and other things that like aerial units will shoot at you.
There's a really tangible sense of interacting with Pandora when you're harvesting, and I think it ties back into when you're hunting as well. That sense of you bringing your skill as a player, matching the Navi that you're playing, how they learn to be more skillful Navi, like that I think is great.
Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora is definitely, a first-person open world action adventure, but there are some mechanics that are like, I would say, lightly inspired by survival, such as our energy system. In our energy system, of course, you need to kind of eat to keep that up, and if the lower energy you are, the slower your health regenerates. You never get to a point where, you die if you run out of food or anything like that. But yeah, I think those elements are really interesting for us because it relates back to living in Pandora and being part of Pandora. So cooking it's fairly open-ended. So you collect 2 ingredients and you can combine them, which gives you, yes, energy, but also a buff. And so we have 10 different ingredient categories, and each of those categories actually has a buff. So when you're going to cook with fish, for example, as a primary ingredient, you're going to get a very specific buff. So that's one flavor. That's the kind of more predictable, you have a lot of control, it's easy to remember the rules. But then we have the more like adventurous version, which is you can get unique buffs and like the best buffs if you just pay like a little bit of attention. And there are these things that we call specialty dishes. And they are a very, very specific ingredient matched with a very, very specific ingredient. And only if you combine those 2 ingredients will you make something that gives you a unique buff, and it's the best kind of buff. Most are really useful and unique, and there's some that we hope people find that are just like a little bit more fun and playful.
See them down there.
And up there.
Not for long. This will be their last flight. Today, we finish what they started. Let their ashes shroud the sky. I will throw their fire.
It was always designed with co-op in mind. It's a part of our DNA as a studio. We make multiplayer games, and being able to experience Pandora with a friend, that's something that we think is fun and great, and that's something that we want to offer players. So
we do retain character progression, of course, and then story progression. If you're at the same place in the story, you'll both progress your story. But when you go back to your game, and if you're in completely different parts, that's where only if you're at the same part in the campaign will we allow the co-op player to retain the progress of the campaign. But everything else is retained.
We really wanted it to be more like a friendly co-op experience and make it non-competitive and make it like hard to mess with other people's experience. So it's really based on the principle of like friendly, fun, convenient drop in, drop out kind of experience.
There's all sorts of really interesting things that we like to do internally, and I suspect players will also enjoy doing. So, you can have one player kind of infiltrate on the ground, go to like an outpost or a base or something, and take out the anti-air turrets, either hack or destroy them. And then the other player just comes and starts bombing from above with their Banshee, creating all sorts of chaos, and then you can just kind of mop up people. So there's all sorts of like fun strategies like that.
It's always a balance to figure out what is the main focus of the co-op. And in our case, we're focusing on bringing the experience, bringing the narrative experience to players, and they get to experience that together. That's been the focus for us.
We don't actually do any like very specific scaling for the player, and there's a couple reasons why. So number one, we kind of wanted to encourage people to like play together, like around the same place, but we also didn't want to artificially restrict players or, have to deal with giving players equipment and then taking it away, or like having loot that you couldn't equip until later. We really wanted to like remove some of those restrictions and frictions that you see in other kind of co-op games. So we tried to just keep it as open and honest as possible. Player one, or the world owner, kind of sets the tone for everything else, and player two is there, and if they're underpowered, they're going to have a harder time. But you can always trade equipment, so you can also give them things, and that's actually going to get them to the right kind of damage and health values. Because of the way our progression system works, it's all about you upgrading your gear.
Follow me.
I won't hurt you. No!
Players do not need to have seen the movies. I mean, a lot of people obviously have seen the first movie especially, but also the second movie because they're, both in the top 10 films of all time, box office wise. But you don't need to. I think you can absolutely go into this game without having seen them and experience the story and the characters and the world and have that experience for the first time without having seen them. If you have watched the movies, then it will be an exciting extension of the universe and there'll be like very cool new things to explore and discover. But yeah, it's not a requirement.
The nature experiences that we bring and allowing you to be immersed. There's moments of silence, calm, and like a peaceful atmosphere in our game that I think is really unique and really special and reminds me of the kind of calm that I can find in nature as well. That's one ambition that we've had from the start that I really feel like we're delivering on, and I'm really, really happy for people to see.
There's a number of unique gameplay mechanics, and I think really focusing on the crafting, harvesting journey, your power coming from nature, your superhuman Navi senses. I think all of those aspects really, make us stand out. We also have the world of the Western frontier. I've never seen part of Pandora that I think is a lot of fun to explore. There's all sorts of mysteries and secrets and little nooks and crannies and stories that you can unveil.
There is a quest that I wrote that makes everybody cry. So I'm quite excited to see what happens when that goes out into the world, whether it's just us who cry about it.
It's about discovering who you really are. It's about reclaiming the world that was stolen from you. It's about discovering all of these new characters and new clans and new landscapes.
All of these kind of messages that are inherently part of Avatar are also really important to us as game makers working on this project.
I'm really excited to see what people think. I'm really proud of the story we've told.
These values are things that we try to convey through the narrative, through the way we depict Navi culture, and working with experts in the field to ensure that we do that justice. It's also about representation, allowing players to kind of play who they want to be and who best represents them. And then the environmental message I think is also incredibly important to Lightstorm and to Avatar, and also really important to us, not only on Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, but also at Massive and at Ubisoft.